speculation. You know, casual Sixers fans, they'll trade me for a crumble cookie.
And Harris telling him to go through. He's looking to post up Josh Hart.
Creates space with a beautiful move and bangs in the jump shot.
Beautiful move there by Murray.
Tobias Harris over me?
Fuck Tobias Harris! Fuck Tobias Harris!
He could have been gone.
Fuck Tobias Harris! If a player gets paid $180 million for 5 years to play for you, you'd think he'll be an all-star, right? Well, let me tell you about the time Tobias Harris fleeced the Sixers of their money for his mediocre and outright shit play. He is dubbed as the NBA's biggest thief. Because of his massive contract, the Sixers were definitely limited in terms of maximizing and bringing Embiid help while he is still in his prime. Well, not really, since they were able to get James Harden a few years later, but more on that on another video. And not gonna lie, when he got traded to the Sixers back in 2019, many people thought he was legit, including me. He was averaging 20 points per game in the Clippers. He was showing incredible skill and promise, and when he joined a confident Ben Simmons and all-stars named Embiid and Jimmy Butler, I thought he was the last piece needed to finally win a ring in Philadelphia. They were solid, to say the least. Sixers fans were definitely hyped for the trade. 5 years ago, they were happy with him, and 5 years later, everybody in Philadelphia hated this dude, which begs to question, what happened during his tenure there? We'll start during his time with the Clippers. Tobias Harris declined an $80 million contract extension for a chance of getting a max deal. I mean, he was producing well during his time there. The Clippers weren't up for it, as they wanted to chase bigger stars and actually win more games and possibly a championship, so they shipped him to Philly. And I guess beforehand, the Sixers were impressed with the kind of year he was producing, which basically guaranteed him a max deal. The potential was there. Before he got traded, he was averaging 50% from the field and 40% from the three. At the time, many people considered him to be one of the most underrated players in the league. It may be an overreaction for how the Sixers paid him for an up year, but it was a risk they were willing to take. They were banking on his potential alone. The signs definitely came, though. Against the Raptors back in the 2019 playoffs, he struggled, to say the least. He never had a good game against the eventual champions. He shot them out of the game in Game 4. Out of 23 shots, he only made 7 of them. Out of 13 three-point attempts, he made only 2. Momentum can make or break your team winning a game. But Tobias not making any shots definitely kills any momentum started. And that series gave us one of the most iconic game winners we have seen in this decade.
Here if you're Philly. It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger? No! Game! Series! Toronto is won!
Although Tobias played bad that series, he was still paid. But why was he paid? Well, the Sixers were expecting elite 3-and-D production from him. Because remember, his best year was his contract year. He was playing his heart out and was producing well. He was also just 26 years old, so he had more leverage and he can ask for whatever he wants. He can only just get better from there. And that Jimmy Butler was also already 30 years old at the time. He also had this reputation of being a locker room cancer those years, considering what happened in Minnesota before he got to Philly. So they weighed the pros and cons and chose Tobias. And fast forward a few years later, it was definitely a mistake. And it didn't take long for the Sixers and the city of Philadelphia to realize it was a mistake. After signing that deal, it was becoming clearer that Tobias Harris is not the piece the Sixers needed to win a championship. We'll fast forward to the 2020 bubble, against Jason Tatum and the Celtics. Ben Simmons was hurt, so in order to win against a well-constructed Boston team, everybody needs to step up, including Tobias. This was why he was paid that much money, to be the third star, to be the elite scoring wing they needed him to be. His role during this time increased. This was his chance to prove to everybody why he got paid. But he played poorly. He played so bad. 38% from the field that series. Only 2 threes made in that 4-game sweep. 4 games and only made 2. After 1 year of signing that $180 million deal, the Sixers were desperate to get rid of him. But nobody wanted him. He was basically untradeable. His playstyle was clunky to say the least. He refuses to take good shots, always taking these contested mid-range, and most of the time it doesn't even go in. So they kept him. But the next season was actually his quote-unquote best season as a Sixer. Doc Rivers, his former coach in LA, was hired by Philadelphia to be the next head coach for them, and he actually made Tobias better. For the first time in 2 years, the people of Philadelphia actually want and supported him. It was all coming together. He can now be the third star that they projected him to be. He can now silence the haters. But as we all know, that ended like a fantasy. He played shit in the playoffs again. This cycle repeated 3 times in a row. And the thing is, sometimes numbers lie. If you looked at his stats from the ESPN page, it wouldn't look like he was a bad player. That's why you needed to actually be there and watch the games go down. Because the stats doesn't show his bad plays that can shift the momentum for the other team. He is not a difference maker whatsoever. Sometimes his stats can just be empty. And if you remember, that was also the same series where Ben Simmons lost his confidence and passed up an open dunk. The cards just differed from the Sixers' favor. The Sixers choked so bad during that series, most of the blame was shifted towards the 2 stars Ben and Embiid. So Harris was able to get past criticisms unscathed by most of the NBA media. Don't get it wrong, he sucked during that Hawks series. He scored 24 points in the Game 7 loss, but shot a horrendous 8 out of 24 from the field. Ben got the most hate of that series, which makes you wonder if Tobias will take this as a learning opportunity to be better, so he wouldn't get much slander like his star teammate. But it didn't turn out that way. He continued this underachieving cycle until the end of his Sixers tenure. But after that series, the criticisms are starting to catch up to him. Because remember, although he was the highest paid player in that Sixers roster, every time they imploded, no one criticizes him as much as they do the 2-star players. But people starting to see the cracks in his game. Before, he was rarely called out for his shortcomings, but the number of people criticizing him started the rise. Slowly, but surely. After the Hawks series, Ben Simmons held out because he felt like he was betrayed by his own coach and the city who drafted him. So Tobias had to step up, since the second star is not playing. His shortcomings are becoming more and more obvious by the majority of the fans, which definitely annoyed him to say the least. I guess the scrutinizing part of the game is not what he is used to, because he was loved most of his career, or at least nobody cared too much about him at the start. His stats were also regressing during this season. So although he was irritated, many fans didn't care, because he still played poorly and it was hard to watch him at times. And in the playoffs in the second round against Jimmy Butler and the Heat, not much was different. He kept struggling. He was back at being a third option, since James Harden was traded to the Sixers as the season went on. So Ben Simmons is out, and he was still expected to carry some type of load, especially against the man the Sixers gave up in order to sign him that $180 million deal. And he did that, but only for 2 games. The rest of the series was bad again. He was unplayable when he shot bad, which was most of the series. He wasn't great at defending people. He wasn't hustling or making plays to help shift the momentum towards the Sixers' favor. Like, at least if you aren't shooting well, you should do things to help impact the game. He did none of it. So they lost in the second round again, and that series gave us one of the most iconic post-game quotes of the decade.
Tobias Harris over me?
The last years of Tobias Harris as a Sixer was really painful to say the least. Everybody was in agreement that he needed to go. The Sixers are not going to win with him, as his game since he got there never improved. The Sixers were just mid during those years, because Tobias was hogging all the money. The wing depth was Tobias and an old PJ Tucker, and when Harden got traded, it was Tobias and a 35-year-old Nico. The Sixers couldn't be flexible even if they wanted to. There were monetary constraints, and no other team wanted to take on Tobias's horrible contract. Against the Celtics in the second round during the 2023 playoffs, the Sixers had a chance to advance to the Western Conference Finals as they were leading 3-2. But they lost a close Game 6, where Tobias just scored 2 points in 42 minutes of play. His inability to step up when it matters the most is one of the reasons why the Sixers keep losing playoff matchups. They ultimately lost in 7 against the Celtics. His last year as a Sixer was very disappointing. His averages were lower, and he had a negative impact on the Philly team. Embiid was out for most of the season due to injury, so Tobias had the chance to be the #1 option and carry the load the team needed him to do, to minimize the scrutiny. Unfortunately, he was still incapable to. The Sixers' standing just went lower and lower, and his averages remained the same throughout the year, even when Embiid not there. Fortunately for Sixers fans, Embiid came back just in time so that they can enjoy one more playoff run. But unfortunately for Sixers fans, they had to watch another playoff run with the bag chaser still being there. And he underperformed once again, averaging just 9 points during the first round against the Knicks, and scoring just 0 points in Game 6. Finally, after 5 long years, Tobias's contract comes to an end. And the Sixers are definitely not resigning the guy after fleecing them $180 million. But fortunately for Tobias, he was able to fleece another team into giving him money. The Pistons signed Tobias for a 2-year, $50 million contract to play for them. Definitely the right decision for the guy. He's not meant to be in a contending team. His role is to generate decent stats in a losing franchise, the ultimate tank commander. And if the Pistons are expecting him to be the guy that will lead him to the playoffs, I am very sorry to disappoint. That is clearly not his role. So there you go, you have met Tobias Harris, a 6'8" power forward who was expected to be a key piece to a contending franchise. Instead, he underachieved during his 5-year tenure there, and in the process made $300 million in career earnings. We could sit here and clown him all we want, but one thing's for sure. He secured that bag.